And the place to start, I think, is in Fayetteville, Arkansas. And it's not for great reasons. I don't know if you heard, but John Calipari, he left Kentucky. He's now the coach at Arkansas. They hired him for a lot of money, and then they gave him a lot of money to buy a team via NIL. So he bought a bunch of good players. The roster was so good that it was preseason top 20 in the AP poll. But right now, Arkansas 0-5 in the SEC, projected to miss the NCAA tournament. Norlander, we polled more than 100 college basketball coaches last offseason from all levels of the sport. And we asked them who was the best hire of 2024. They told us it was John Calipari, and it's still too early to, rule on that completely, but it's obviously not off to a great start. Right now, you might call it the worst. What happened? Why has this gone so poorly?
He didn't recruit the right roster. He isn't coaching the pieces the right way. And John Calipari going into this season, coaching Arkansas was one of the biggest stories in the sport. And now, as we have crossed the halfway point, it remains one of the biggest stories of the sport, but not for the reasons that we thought. I've got the numbers on it because I pulled it up too, what that Candid Coaches story we did. So we pulled more than 100 coaches. Cal won comfortably, 43.4% of the vote. Dusty May was number 2, and that's off to a nice start at Michigan. He was 21.7. Mark Pope was 3rd place, 8.5% though. You see what Kentucky's doing. And then Pat Kelsey at Louisville and Kevin Young both shared 4.7% of that vote. Looking at this now, it's pretty stark. It's pretty stunning. I think West Virginia's Darren DeVries got either 1 or 2 votes total in that poll. And you look at what he's doing with maybe 40% of the NIL allotment that Cal had at Arkansas, maybe. And he's got, a 13-4 team that is pacing toward the NCAA tournament. Here are 3 quotes that we got from coaches last summer doing this poll. 1, Cal stayed too long in Kentucky. He knows that now, but I talked to him on the road, and you can just tell that a weight is lifted off him. I'll be shocked if he doesn't go to another Final Four. He's going to win big again. He has everything he needs to win big again. That's quote number 1. Quote number 2. He will be extra motivated in the SEC at a school that has more than enough resources to compete at the highest level. No one is better than Cal at reinventing himself and creating the us against the world mentality that will ultimately get him back to the top. And then quote number 3, Calipari is the best hire. His track record at every stop is the highest, and it's the highest level in the sport. Arkansas may sneak into his best spot with all of this, the reserves that he has, the fan support, and the backdrop of less attention will give him some freedom to breathe. He will enjoy it there more. None of that is bearing out to be. It is shocking to see that Arkansas is such a non-factor in the SEC and has become one of the most disappointing teams, and it is in the running now for the most disappointing team in the entire country at this point. But despite having as big or nearly as big of an NIL war chest in year 1, it hasn't mattered. Janelle Davis is nothing like the player he was at FAU. That's been a big factor, in addition to a lot of other things. But yeah, they're sitting here at 0-5 in the SEC. And I don't, Parrish, do you think that they can turn this? 1, why do you think it hasn't worked? And 2, do you think this is a possible for an in-season turnaround? Because I don't think it's possible. I think John Calipari and the Razorbacks are destined to miss the NCAA tournament in his first season.
I wouldn't use words like possible and impossible and destined. I'd leave a little more wiggle room than that. I would agree that it's unlikely, improbable that they'll turn this around. They've shown at no point this season that they're a good basketball team. And when you haven't shown for 2+ months that you're a good basketball team, I don't know that I can just expect you in late January to turn it around in the best basketball league in the country. Like, you got one good win all season. Now you're supposed to just go start stringing victories against good teams one after the other. Maybe, crazier things have happened. Not much crazier, but crazier things have happened. But it seems improbable at this point. So what happened? I've had a million different people ask me that question. Another million people offer theories. I think the first thing that people miscalculate on this is that the outsider's perspective is that John Calipari needed to reinvent himself, that John Calipari needed to go to Fayetteville and be something very different than he had been in Lexington. But you know who I don't think believed that? I don't think John Calipari believed that, because though he did get run out of Kentucky after a loss to Oakland, knowing the way his mind works, I bet you when he looks back on the ending at Kentucky the last few years, he would insist to you that it's not as bad as people made it out to be. You know, he won the SEC in 2020. That's the season that we cut short because of the pandemic, but they won the SEC that year. And then the next year was the year that was constantly interrupted by COVID, and they were not good and missed the NCAA tournament. But I bet you he blames that on the pandemic, not on his ability to coach a basketball team. And then the 3 subsequent years after that, 2022, 23, and 24, he finished top 3 in the SEC in each of those 3 seasons, went to the NCAA tournament every time, and lost to St. Peter's, and lost to Oakland. But I bet you when he's talking to his friends, he says, I was a 3 seed in the NCAA tournament, and Jack Golke, who I had never heard of a week earlier, went wild on me and made 1 billion threes, and we got beat. You know, that's basketball. I bet you he doesn't think it's an indictment, or never did, of him not changing with the times the way so many other people viewed it. So when people are like, he needed to go to Arkansas and reinvent himself, I don't believe he believed that. And so his staff looks very similar to the way it's looked. And when I talk to other coaches, both in his league and out, they tell me right now that, and I say this as respectfully as I can say it, I know these people, but they wonder if John has surrounded himself with people who can help him. He is about to turn 66 years old. And sometimes it's helpful to surround yourself with people who have fresh ideas, new ideas, younger people with new approaches. Right now, his staff doesn't really check that box. And I think that's the next step after the season. If he ever wants to be what it is Arkansas thought he could be when they gave him all this money, both for him to coach and for him to build a roster with, if it's ever going to be that, I think it starts with him actually taking a fresh approach to things, a modernized approach to things. And that probably means staff changes where he can get some new voices in the building.
Yeah, Kenny Payne, a longtime assistant, obviously had the epic flame out at Louisville. He's on this staff. John Robick is notably not on this staff. And if you go back and look over the years and look at Calipari, for the most part, not every single year, but for the most part, when John Robick is employed by John Calipari, those teams do better than when John Robick is not. That's obviously notable as well. He may be, if not forced, certainly induced to make changes if it goes this way, because you can't keep going like this if you're Arkansas. This is a fan base that was waiting for a long time, decades, before Eric Musselman finally got them to the Sweet 16. You know, they went basically 2.5 decades without getting back to the second weekend in the NCAA tournament. He did a good job, and then last year was a huge letdown. And now here they are, projected 5-13 team in the league. This season is a bust. Right now, I looked at the top 7 leagues at KenPom. Here are the teams as of Tuesday, January 1st, that have yet to win a conference game. We'll go from the bottom up. In the WCC, the number 7 league at KenPom, 0. Every single team has won at least one conference game. In the Mountain West, it's only Air Force. In the ACC, it's only Miami, which is the worst high major team in the country, and it's not close. Just allowed SMU to drop 117 on its program over the weekend. The Big East, everyone has won at least one game. In the Big 12, it's only Colorado. In the Big 10, none. Every Big 10 team has won at least one. In the SEC, it's South Carolina, which is regarded as the worst team, and then Arkansas. So at the high major level, there are only 4. But if you go to the top 7 conferences, only 5 teams you have to win a league game, and Arkansas is one of them. It's real bad, and they've got to make some big changes. And I'm not. I know you're not prone to want to use the words impossible, and I get why, GP, kind of stave off the idea that it could happen. You don't want to say it couldn't, but I'm telling you right now, lost 5 in a row. They've got Georgia at home on Wednesday. It is a must win. They've got Oklahoma this weekend. That's a must win. Then they are at Kentucky. They're at Texas, home against Bama, home against LSU, which has already defeated them. And then they're at Texas A&M and at Auburn. There's no evidence that they're going to turn this around. The best win I saw in person at the Garden against Michigan, it was a narrow win. They got it. They were fortunate to get it. But other than that, they don't have a single win on the schedule of note. And this is shaping up to be the most disappointing, arguably, if not the most, certainly the second most disappointing season Calipari has ever had in his more than 30 years as a head coach.
Just 2-7 in the first 2 quadrants. 2 wins in the first 2 quadrants. On January 21st, 2025. Arkansas State has more than that. So does Bradley. So does UC Riverside. And making things even worse, I think, because it'd be bad no matter what, but there's tons of first-year coaches having incredible amounts of success. So you can't even be like it takes time, because it's not taking time at West Virginia. It's not taking time at Louisville. It's not taking time at Vanderbilt. And you know where else it's not taking time? Kentucky, the place you left, and they hired your replacement. And by most accounts, he had less resources. He inherited less, built an inferior roster just based on individual talent. But Mark Pope at Kentucky right now has a legitimate Final Four contender, a team that's spent weeks ranked in the top 10. And John Calipari at Arkansas, again, 0-5 in the SEC, just 2-7 in the first two quadrants, expected to miss the NCAA tournament in year one in Fayetteville.